everybody already has all the internal resources they need to succeed. Earlier, we talked about how, as hypnotists, we're not making people fit our mold. There isn't an ideal that we want people to be. It's ideally, we're helping people discover inside themselves what resources they already have to help them toward the change. Every smoker was once a non-smoker. Every person afraid of public speaking was once a baby crying in a theater. Everybody who weighs 300 pounds once weighed 120, at least on the way up. Everybody already has been at a point in their life where you want them to be. And that makes your job easier. I mean, it means you don't have to create a behavior out of nothing. You just have to remind people of what it's like to be a non-smoker or to be completely fearless. It's a very client-centered attitude. We'll talk a bit about client-centeredness later on, but it means that you hold the client in high esteem, even though you are an authority figure working with them, and you sort of have to maintain that relative status position relative to them. At the same time, it's sort of like you raise yourself up so you can raise them up as well. And it means that you're looking for things inside of them that you can bring to conscious awareness that will help them out of the problem. Sometimes people need to hear somebody else tell them, you know, now you're going to be a non-smoker. Because often, if they just talk within themselves, they find reasons out of that suggestion. But really, the only reason they accept your suggestion is because they already have that desire inside of them, and you're just bringing it out. You can't really create that out of nothing. I mean, you can't make somebody a non-smoker who doesn't want to be. You can't make somebody get in front of a crowd if they don't actually want to do it. You can only help them focus on their desire to speak in public and forget about the fears or reframe the limiting beliefs. And what's left is just the desire to do it. If you take the attitude that every behavior has a positive intention, and you look for that positive intention, you tend to find it. Usually this comes up in parts therapy, where you're having the client identify the part of them that wants them to smoke. Even though it's the part of the client that wants them to smoke, you assume it has a positive intention. Sometimes it's really easy to find. Sometimes, almost universally, it's, I want the client to relax. Sometimes, much more rarely, it starts to say things like, you know, I am the self-destructive part. I'm the part that comes up when Bob really is feeling down on himself. Probe further. Well, when Bob's feeling down on himself and you have him smoke a cigarette, how does it make him feel? It makes him feel better. Okay. We have feeling better as a higher intention behind the habit of smoking. Sometimes you have to probe even further. But if you assume that there's a positive intention behind every behavior, you're going to keep probing, and you're going to keep looking. And eventually, the spotlight of the client's awareness will shine upon exactly what they need to overcome the problem. They'll find the positive intention that needs to be met. Very rarely do we actually have a part to say that it needs to be destroyed or it just is evil. It happens sometimes. We'll talk about this later on. But assume that every client's behaviors And every part of every client has a positive intention, and you'll find it. Even during the intake, during questioning before the session begins, assume the client's behaviors and problems have a positive intention behind them. Because when you focus on that, you're going to find the needs that are not being met. And if you help the client meet their needs without the bad habit, then they'll be able to change. They'll have an easy path to walk down. And part of your job is really to either illuminate or create that path. Every behavior is appropriate in some context. People develop the fears that they have because at one point it was or it seemed appropriate. If you burn yourself on a fire and you develop a fear of fire, well, in the context of being near fire, you want to have a healthy respect for fire. If you smoked when you were 16 because it helped you fit in with a certain group and it satisfied social needs that weren't being met any other way, it was appropriate in that context. But then contexts change. You know, when you're 30 years old and you have no problem socializing and all your friends are non-smokers, well, the context has changed, but the behavior is still the same. But this is one way of seeing how every behavior has a positive intention, because behaviors are appropriate in some context. Getting angry is appropriate in many contexts. Being afraid is appropriate in many contexts. Being sad is appropriate in many contexts. So it's not the behavior. It's when the behavior is in a context where it's not actually helping that you really have room to help them. Your mind and body are indivisible parts of the same system, and each affects the other. You know, in the Western world, we have this mind-body duality that's existed since Descartes, where we sort of see mind and body as separate. And then other philosophies basically see mind and body are the same thing. I prefer to take the middle approach, where it's rather than separate and rather than one, there are two entities that are completely intertwined. So this explains why hypnosis can help with things like pain or bleeding or muscle control. And it also explains why physical problems often originate in the mind. It also explains how hypnosis can help with something like smoking. I mean, there is a physical component to most smoking addictions. It's not just a habit for many people, there's a physical addiction, yet hypnosis is effective for smoking cessation. And the only way that can be is if mind affects the body through the intertwined link between the two. And the other way as well. Physical illness can manifest in increased stress or negative emotion. Pain, for example. There's the physical pain, but there's also emotional suffering that goes with physical pain. And the two make each other worse. Whereas you can feel physical pain without actually suffering from it. And then it becomes another sensation, like anything else. If one person can do something, somebody else can learn to do it too. So this basically says we all have the same hardware, the same ability to learn and to do things, because we're all human. What makes one person a great writer or coach or dancer and somebody else not is just the software in their mind. And if one person can become a good teacher or coach or anything else, then you can take the software from one person and put that software in somebody else. And you teach the other person to do it. I mean, of course, there are physical limitations. I mean, we can't all be Michael Jordan or Fred Phelps or somebody else. But at the same time, within the physical limitations, there are many things that we can do by modeling or learning from other people. What limits people is usually their own beliefs. They believe, well, that person's innately talented and I'm not, so I can't do what that person does. But they see the limitation of their map rather than what's actually possible out there. And we're in the business of expanding people's maps and helping them see other possibilities so that that path is available for them to go down. If one person can become a non-smoker after one session, other people can do it too. And just because other people can doesn't mean everybody always will. But the possibility exists that if one person can do something, because we're all human, another person can learn to do the same thing. And many of these processes are skills, not just hypnosis being a skill. Becoming a non-smoker is a skill. I mean, some people learn to manage cravings. They learn to build their confidence and their self-image being a non-smoker. When they learn that, it's much easier to be a non-smoker. And in fact, it feels good to conquer the cravings. It feels good to conquer the temptations. In that case, they're undefeatable because the excuse people use is, well, I felt too much craving. If you see it as a challenge, then the more cravings you feel, the better the victory when you conquer the craving. There's no such thing as failure, only feedback. And this, I think you mentioned this as well earlier, which is that if you take this attitude, then you will be persistent. You might be persistent in the same way or in a different way, but if you see it as, it's not that I did this induction and I failed. It's that I've learned what isn't working for this client. So what I have to do next is do a different induction, or the same induction in a different style, or I have to prepare the client further before the induction. If the client is prone to jumping to the conclusion that they failed, they're going to sabotage your good efforts. So what you also have to do is get the client on board with the idea that there's just feedback, no such thing as failure. And what it means is, well, what I ask clients to do is observe your thoughts and your feelings and your behaviors, however they are, and also observe what other people tell you about changes you've made. Often other people see the changes you make before you see them yourself. I mean, again, the metaphor I use is your eye cannot see itself. If you look in a mirror, your eye's distorted, it's flipped around. Other people see you more objectively than you see yourself. So often other people see changes in you before you see the change in yourself. Often if you're feeling good, you think, well, I always felt basically good. And it can be hard to remember how bad it felt a week or 2 weeks ago when you are feeling really good. So often people don't recognize the changes that they make until somebody else who's seen them over time points out those changes. So I do ask clients to observe themselves with the underlying belief that there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback. And I ask clients to bring that feedback back to me. This ties into results-based hypnosis. This ties into the TOTE model, where we're just testing, observing, and then operating the same way or different way depending on the feedback that we get.